The frozen winds of Kepler 442b howled across the abandoned research station like the screams of dying gods. Commander Sarah Chen pressed her face against the cracked viewport, watching the storm tear through the skeletal remains of what had once been humanity's most ambitious colony attempt. Ice crystals the size of dinner plates smashed against the reinforced glass, each impact sending spider web fractures deeper into the material. Her breath fogged the inside of her helmet as she surveyed the devastation below. 3 months ago, this place had been home to over 2,000 colonists. Now it was a graveyard of twisted metal and shattered dreams, buried under 40 feet of alien snow that fell sideways in the planet's chaotic weather patterns. "Commander, we're picking up heat signatures in Sector 7, reported Lieutenant Torres from the scanner station. His voice carried that careful neutrality that soldiers used when they didn't want to get their hopes up. They'd been searching for survivors for 6 days now, and every heat signature so far had turned out to be malfunctioning equipment or thermal vents from the planet's unstable core. Sarah turned from the viewport, her heavy boots clanking against the metal floor of their rescue ship, the Determination. She'd named it herself 3 years ago, back when she still believed that human willpower could overcome any obstacle the universe threw at them. Now she wondered if determination was enough against a cosmos that seemed actively hostile to human life. "How many signatures?" she asked, moving to peer over Tor's shoulder at the scanner display. The screen showed the familiar blue grid of the colony's layout, overlaid with the red heat blooms that indicated potential life signs. 12 contacts, ma'am, small ones, clustered together in what looks like." Torres paused, cross-referencing the colony's blueprints. "The nursery section, building complex Delta 7. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The nursery section had been designed to house the colony's youngest residents, both human children and the offspring of their alien allies. The Velkai had been humanity's first true friends among the stars, a species of cat-like beings who valued family bonds above all else. Their cubs had played alongside human children in those bright, warm rooms that now lay buried under tons of ice and debris. "Distance?" Sarah asked, already reaching for her environmental suit. 2 kilometers northeast. The building's partially collapsed, but the lower levels might still be intact. "Commander, the temperature readings down there are showing -60 Celsius. Whatever's alive in that building won't last much longer." Sarah was already suiting up, her fingers working automatically through the familiar routine of seals and pressure checks. The environmental suit was a marvel of human engineering, capable of keeping a person alive in the vacuum of space or the crushing depths of an alien ocean. But even it had limits, and Kepler 442b was testing every single one of them. "Prep the rover," she ordered, "and get me a full atmospheric reading on that building. I want to know exactly what we're walking into." "Ma'am, regulations state that rescue operations in hostile environments require a minimum team of 4, Torres said carefully. "We only have 3 people aboard." "Then we go with 3. Sarah's voice brooked no argument. She'd lost too many people already to let regulations stop her from saving whoever was left down there. "Martinez can stay with the ship. You and I are going in." The rover was a 6-wheeled beast designed for exactly this kind of terrain. Its fusion reactor hummed quietly as Sarah guided it down the ship's cargo ramp and into the howling storm outside. Through the rover's reinforced canopy, she could barely see 10 meters ahead. The landscape was a nightmare of twisted metal and ice formations that jutted from the ground like alien teeth. Torres hunched over his scanner, calling out directions as they navigated through the wreckage. "Left 20 degrees. There's a thermal vent ahead. We can use it as a waypoint." His voice was tight with concentration. "Commander, I'm reading massive structural instability in the target building. Whatever caused the initial collapse is still ongoing." "What do you mean, ongoing?" "The planet's tectonic activity has increased since the colony was established. The same seismic events that triggered the initial evacuation are still happening. That building could come down completely at any moment." Sarah gripped the rover's steering controls tighter. The Velkai had trusted humanity enough to send their families to this frozen hell. Their cubs had laughed and played in those nursery rooms, learning human games and teaching their own in return. The bond between the two species had been one of the greatest diplomatic achievements in human history. She wasn't going to let some seismic activity stop her from honoring that bond. The nursery building loomed ahead of them like a broken giant. What had once been a cheerful complex of interconnected domes and play areas was now a twisted wreck of metal and reinforced polymer. The main structure had pancaked in on itself, but Sarah could see that the lower level was still partially intact, its emergency lighting casting an eerie red glow through the accumulated ice. Heat signatures are definitely coming from the sub-basement level, Tors reported. But Commander, the only way in is through that collapsed section. The structural integrity readings are in the red. One wrong step and the whole thing comes down. Sarah stared at the building for a long moment, weighing the risks. She thought about the faces of the Velkai cubs she'd met during the colony's early days. Their large, luminous eyes and soft, fur-covered features. The way they'd chirred with delight when human children taught them to play hide-and-seek. The trust their parents had shown by allowing them to live alongside humanity's young. "We go in," she said finally. "But we go in smart. Tors, I need you to monitor the structural readings from here. Any sign that building's about to collapse, you signal me immediately." "Commander, I should be the one going in there. You're too valuable to risk on." "Those cubs trusted us to keep them safe," Sarah interrupted. "I'm not sending someone else to clean up humanity's failure." She sealed her helmet and checked her suit's emergency oxygen supply. The scanner readings showed 12 small heat signatures huddled together in what had once been the building's storm shelter. 12 young lives depending on her to get this right. The entry point Tors had identified was a jagged hole torn in the building's side wall, probably created when a support beam had given way during the initial collapse. Sarah squeezed through the opening, her suit's lights cutting through the darkness beyond. Ice crystals crunched under her boots as she made her way deeper into the ruined structure. The corridors she remembered as bright and cheerful were now dark tunnels filled with debris. Twisted metal beams hung like broken ribs from the ceiling, and ice had formed strange sculptures where water pipes had burst and frozen instantly in the planet's brutal cold. Her suit's heating elements worked overtime to keep her core temperature stable, but she could still feel the cold trying to seep through the insulation. "I'm reading you 20 meters from the heat signatures," Tor's voice crackled in her helmet comm. "Straight ahead, then down the emergency stairwell." The stairwell was a treacherous descent through twisted metal and accumulated ice. Sarah's suit lights revealed the extent of the damage as she picked her way carefully down the debris-strewn steps. The building's superstructure was held up by little more than wishful thinking and the planet's low gravity. At the bottom of the stairs, she found them. 12 Velkai cubs huddled together in a corner of the emergency shelter, their small bodies pressed close for warmth. Their normally lustrous fur was matted and dull with cold, and their large eyes reflected her suit lights with the desperate hope of prey animals that had given up on escape, but not yet on life. They were so young. Some of them couldn't have been more than a few months old, barely old enough to be away from their mothers. They chirred weakly when they saw her, a sound that was part purr, part whimper, all heartbreak. Sarah's throat tightened. These bobbies had been left behind in the chaos of the evacuation, probably when their caretakers had been forced to choose between saving themselves and staying with charges who couldn't move fast enough. It was the kind of impossible decision that wars and disasters forced on good people, and she didn't blame whoever had made it. But she wasn't going to let these cubs pay the price for that choice. "I found them," she whispered into her comm, not trusting her voice to carry the full weight of what she was feeling. 12 Velkai cubs still alive, barely. The cubs seemed to sense that help had arrived. They began to move toward her, their movements slow and clumsy with cold and hunger. The smallest one, barely the size of a human infant, stumbled and fell. When Sarah reached down to help it up, she could feel how thin it had become through her suit's gloves. "Commander, we need to move fast," Tor's voice was urgent. "I'm reading seismic activity building in this area. Whatever's causing the ongoing collapse, it's about to get a lot worse." Sarah looked at the 12 pairs of eyes watching her with desperate hope, then at her environmental suit's readouts. The suit was designed to protect one human in extreme conditions, not transport a dozen alien cubs through a collapsing building in sub-zero temperatures. The numbers didn't add up. The math was simple and brutal. She couldn't save them all with conventional methods. But humans had never been particularly good at accepting what was mathematically possible. "Tors, what's the temperature differential between my suit's internal heating system and the outside environment?" she asked, her mind racing through possibilities. "Your suit's maintaining 18 degrees Celsius internally. Outside temp is -62 and dropping. Why?" Sarah was already running calculations in her head. Her suit's heating elements were powered by a small fusion cell that could maintain life support for up to 72 hours under normal conditions. But if she rerouted that power, redistributed the heat. Commander, seismic readings are spiking. We need to evacuate now. The building groaned around them, a sound like the death rattle of some enormous beast. Dust and ice crystals rained down from the ceiling as the structure shifted and settled. Sarah could hear metal tearing somewhere above them. She made a decision that would have got her court-martialed if there had been anyone left alive with the authority to convene a court-martial. "New plan," she announced, her fingers already working at her suit's manual override controls. "I'm going to create a mobile environment. My suit's heating system can keep these cubs alive long enough to get them to safety." "Ma'am, that's not possible. Your suit doesn't have the capacity." "It does if I share my armor with them." Sarah was already opening the manual release catches on her suit's torso section. The environmental suit was designed in modular pieces for exactly this kind of field modification, though she doubted the engineers had ever intended it to be used as a portable nursery. The cubs watched with growing excitement as Sarah began to transform her life support system into their salvation. She detached the suit's lower leg sections, creating more internal space. The torso piece could be opened like a clamshell, its internal volume nearly doubling when she removed the unnecessary structural supports. "Commander, your suit's integrity warnings are going crazy. You're compromising your own life support." "I'm modifying it," Sarah corrected, her breathing becoming visible as the suit's internal temperature began to drop. "The heating elements are still functional. The oxygen recycler is still online. I just need to make room for passengers." The smallest cub made a soft churring sound and reached toward her with tiny, clawed hands. Sarah gently scooped it up, feeling its small body shivering through her gloves. It was so light, so fragile. The others began to press closer, understanding somehow that this strange alien was offering them warmth and safety. "Here's what we're going to do," Sarah said, as much to herself as to the cubs. "I'm going to become your mobile shelter. My suit's heating system will keep you warm and the oxygen supply will keep you breathing. We're going to walk out of here together." She began carefully placing the cubs inside the modified suit cavity. They fit better than she'd hoped, their small bodies designed by evolution for huddling together in tight spaces. The suit's internal padding provided cushioning, and the heating elements that had been keeping her comfortable could easily maintain a safe temperature for 12 small aliens. The cubs seemed to understand what was happening. They settled against each other with soft, churring sounds of contentment, some of them already beginning to purr as the suit's warmth enveloped them. The smallest one, which Sarah had started thinking of as Little Bit, curled up against the suit's central heating unit like it was the most comfortable bed in the universe. "Commander, your internal suit temperature is dropping fast. Your core body temp is going to start falling in about 10 minutes. Sarah sealed the modified suit around her passengers, leaving her arms and legs exposed to the killing cold. She could already feel the temperature difference, the brutal alien winter beginning to seep through her underlying thermal layers. Her fingers were starting to go numb despite her gloves. 10 minutes is more than enough time to get back to the rover," she said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. The path back through the collapsed building would be treacherous, and she'd have to move carefully with her precious cargo. "Keep monitoring those seismic readings." She stood up, feeling the weight of 12 young lives pressed against her torso. The modified suit's heating system hummed reassuringly, and she could hear the soft churring of the cubs as they finally began to warm up. The sound gave her strength. The journey back through the ruined building became a race against time and physics. Sarah's exposed limbs were already starting to lose feeling, and her breath came in visible puffs that froze instantly in the killing air. But inside her makeshift mobile habitat, 12 Velkai cubs were alive and warming up, their soft purring creating a vibration she could feel through the suit's modified structure. "Seismic activity is increasing," Tors reported, his voice tight with worry. "Commander, I'm reading massive stress fractures developing in the building's support structure. You need to move faster." Sarah was already moving as fast as she dared. Each step had to be carefully placed to avoid jarring her passengers, and the improvised suit modification made her balance awkward. The cubs' weight distribution kept shifting as they moved around inside their mobile shelter, forcing her to constantly adjust her center of gravity. Halfway up the emergency stairwell, the building shuddered violently. A support beam crashed down behind her, blocking the path she'd just traveled. The cubs inside her suit chittered nervously, pressing closer together in fear. "It's okay," Sarah whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was talking to them or herself. "We're almost there, almost home." Her fingers were completely numb now, and she could feel her core body temperature beginning to drop. The thermal layers beneath her environmental suit were good, but they'd never been designed to protect against this level of cold exposure. She had maybe 5 more minutes before hypothermia started affecting her motor functions. The building's exit hole seemed impossibly far away, though her suit's display showed she was only 30 meters from safety. Each step was becoming harder as the cold sapped strength from her muscles, but the purring from inside her suit reminded her why every step mattered. 20 meters, Tor's voice was a lifeline in the growing chaos. "I can see your suit lights. Keep coming straight ahead." Sarah pushed forward through the debris field, her vision starting to blur from the cold. Her suit's medical monitors were shrieking warnings about hypothermia and frostbite, but the heating system keeping the cubs warm was still functioning perfectly. That was all that mattered. 10 meters. I'm bringing the rover's heating system online for emergency thermal shock treatment. The exit hole appeared ahead of her like a beacon of hope. Beyond it, she could see the warm glow of the rover's cabin lights and Tors moving around inside, preparing for their arrival. Just a few more steps. She stumbled through the opening and nearly collapsed against the rover's side. Tors was there immediately, helping guide her toward the passenger compartment. The wave of warm air from the rover's heating system hit her like a physical force. "Get inside," Tors urged. "I need to get your core temperature back up before." "The cubs first," Sarah interrupted through chattering teeth. "They've been cold longer." She began the delicate process of transferring her passengers from the modified suit to the rover's climate-controlled cabin. The cubs emerged from their mobile shelter blinking and churring, their fur already beginning to regain its lustrous quality as they warmed up. They immediately huddled together on the rover's padded seats, their purring filling the small space with a sound like tiny engines. Little Bit was the last one out, and it seemed reluctant to leave the warmth of Sarah's suit. When she gently lifted it free, it reached up with small hands and touched her face through her helmet, making a soft sound that needed no translation. "You're welcome," Sarah whispered. Tors wrapped thermal blankets around her shivering form as the cubs explored their new environment. They were weak from hunger and cold, but they were alive. They were safe. And for the first time in months, Sarah felt like humanity had done something right on this frozen planet. "Commander," Tors said quietly, "your suit telemetry shows you came within 2 degrees of severe hypothermia. Another few minutes and you might have." "But I didn't," Sarah replied, watching as the cubs began to investigate the rover's supply compartments with renewed energy. "And they're alive, that's what matters." The rover's communications system crackled to life. "Determination, this is Martinez aboard ship. I'm reading massive seismic activity in your area. You need to evacuate immediately." Through the rover's rear window, they watched the nursery building finally give up its fight against physics and collapse completely. The structure folded in on itself like a house of cards, tons of metal and concrete crashing down into the space where 12 small lives had been waiting to die. If Sarah had followed regulations, if she had taken the time to organize a proper rescue team, if she had hesitated for even a few minutes longer, those cubs would have been crushed under the debris. Instead, they were purring contentedly in the warm safety of the rover, occasionally chirping at each other in their own language as they began to realize they were truly safe. But their journey was far from over. Sarah knew that getting the cubs off this planet would require resources and help that the determination didn't have. They would need to find a way to contact the Velkai homeworld to arrange for proper transport and medical care. They would need to explain how 12 young lives had been left behind in the chaos of evacuation and how one human had risked everything to bring them home. Most importantly, they would need to prove that the bond between humans and Velkai was strong enough to survive even the worst disasters the universe could throw at them. 3 hours later, aboard the Determination, Sarah sat in the ship's small medical bay watching Dr. Martinez examine the cubs. The ship's AI had done its best to create appropriate environmental conditions for their young passengers, adjusting the atmosphere mixture and humidity to match Velkai requirements. The cubs were responding well to the treatment, their fur beginning to regain its natural thickness and their energy levels improving by the hour. Little Bit had claimed a spot on Sarah's lap and refused to move, its small claws gently kneading her uniform as it purred. The other cubs had spread throughout the medical bay, investigating every piece of equipment with the boundless curiosity of healthy young animals. Their chirping and churring filled the space with sounds of life and hope. Physiologically, they're in remarkable condition considering what they've been through, Martinez reported, running his scanner over the smallest of the group. Moderate hypothermia, some dehydration, and they're underweight, but nothing that can't be corrected with proper care. Their species' natural resistance to cold probably saved their lives. How long were they alone down there? Sarah asked, gently stroking Little Bit's soft fur. Based on their condition and the timeline of the evacuation, I'd estimate about 10 days, maybe longer. Martinez shook his head in amazement. They survived by huddling together for warmth and sharing body heat. Their natural pack bonding behaviors probably made the difference between life and death. Sarah looked around at the cubs exploring their new environment. 10 days alone in a freezing, collapsing building with no food and little warmth. Most human children wouldn't have survived half that time. But these young Velkai had endured through instinct, determination, and the bonds they shared with each other. "Commander," Tors called from the bridge, "I've managed to establish long-range communications with the Velkai homeworld. They're requesting immediate contact with you." Sarah carefully lifted Little Bit from her lap and placed it with its siblings. The cub protested with a soft chirp, but quickly settled against one of the others. She made her way to the bridge, where the main view screen showed the image of a mature Velkai female, her golden fur marked with the intricate patterns that denoted high rank in their society. "Commander Chen," the Velkai said, her voice carrying the formal cadence of diplomatic protocol. "I am High Matriarch Kesara of the Homeworld Council. We received your transmission regarding survivors from Kepler 442b. Our records indicate that all Velkai personnel were evacuated when the colony was abandoned." Sarah took a breath. This was going to be difficult. "Matriarch Kesara, I regret to inform you that your records are incomplete. We have recovered 12 Velkai cubs from the abandoned nursery facility. They appear to have been left behind during the evacuation." The silence that followed was profound. Sarah could see the shock and pain that flashed across the matriarch's feline features. When she spoke again, her voice was carefully controlled. "That is not possible. The evacuation protocols specifically required confirmation that all young were accounted for before any transport departed the surface. Are you certain these cubs are Velkai?" "I'm transmitting biometric data now," Sarah replied, gesturing for Tors to upload the medical scanner readings. 12 individuals, ages ranging from approximately 2 months to 8 months by human equivalent, all in stable condition despite extended exposure to hostile environmental conditions. The data stream completed, and Sarah watched the matriarch's expression change as she reviewed the information. The careful diplomatic mask slipped, revealing a depth of emotion that transcended species barriers. "These are cubs from the Moonrise clan," Kesara whispered. "Children of families who were serving as cultural liaisons with your colony. According to our records, they were evacuated on transport vessel Gentle Current 3 standard weeks ago." "The Gentle Current never made it to the evacuation point," Tors interjected, checking the colony's final transmission logs. "Long-range sensors detected a massive atmospheric disturbance in this system around that timeframe. We assumed all ships had cleared the area before the storms hit." The implications hung in the air like a physical presence. The Gentle Current had been lost with all hands, including the adult Velkai who had been caring for these cubs. In the chaos of the evacuation, with communication systems failing and multiple ships departing simultaneously, the cubs had been overlooked. They had been forgotten. "Matriarch," Sarah said carefully, "I want you to know that my crew and I will ensure these cubs reach safety. We're prepared to transport them wherever you need them to go." "Commander Chen," Kesara replied, her voice thick with emotion, "you have recovered our lost children. According to Velkai law and custom, this creates a bond of obligation that transcends normal diplomatic relations. You have become their guardian until they can be returned to clan custody." Sarah felt the weight of that responsibility settle on her shoulders. "I understand. What are your instructions?" The nearest Velkai facility capable of caring for orphan cubs is the Sanctuary Station in the Altair system, approximately 6 days' travel from your current position. However, Commander, the matriarch paused, her large eyes reflecting something that might have been hope. These cubs have endured trauma that goes beyond physical hardship. They have lost their families, their homes, everything familiar. Our child psychologists believe that maintaining stability with their current caregiver would be beneficial for their emotional recovery. You're asking me to accompany them to Altair. I am asking you to consider remaining with them until they can be properly integrated into new family units. Your presence has already become a source of comfort and security for them. Breaking that bond prematurely could cause additional psychological damage. Sarah thought about Little Bit's refusal to leave her side, about the way all 12 cubs had immediately trusted her despite never seeing a human before. She thought about her own mission parameters, which were supposed to involve cataloging the disaster on Kepler 442b and filing a report for the colonial administration. Those mission parameters seemed very small compared to 12 young lives that needed protection. I accept the guardianship, Sarah said formally. My crew and I will transport the cubs to Altair and remain with them as long as necessary for their recovery. Relief washed across the matriarch's features. Commander, you honor both our species with this commitment. I will ensure that the sanctuary is prepared for your arrival and that appropriate resources are allocated for the cubs' care. After the transmission ended, Sarah returned to the medical bay to find a remarkable scene. The cubs had arranged themselves in a complex pile of fur and purring bodies, with Little Bit maintaining its position as the designated lookout at the top of the heap. They had claimed the space as their own, turning the sterile medical facility into something that resembled a family den. They've been asking for you, Martinez said with a smile. Well, as much as cubs can ask for anything, Little Bit there has been chirping at the door since you left. Sarah approached the group carefully, not wanting to disturb their arrangement. But as soon as Little Bit spotted her, it began an excited churring that set off a chain reaction of responses from the others. Within seconds, she found herself surrounded by 12 small, warm bodies all vying for her attention. I guess I'm part of the pack now, she said, settling onto the floor and allowing the cubs to climb over her. Commander, Tor's voice came over the intercom, I've plotted a course for Altair. We can depart as soon as you give the order. Sarah looked around at her new charges, feeling a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced since the colony evacuation had begun. These cubs represented something important, proof that the bonds between species could survive even the worst disasters. They were living symbols of trust and cooperation, rescued from the edge of extinction by human determination and now under human protection. Set course for Altair, she ordered. But Tors, patch me through to colonial administration first. I need to file a revised mission report. Ma'am, I need to inform them that the Kepler 442b operation has been expanded to include refugee transport and diplomatic escort duties. This mission just became a lot more important than salvage and documentation. As the Determination's engines powered up for the jump to hyperspace, Sarah found herself thinking about the nature of family and responsibility. These cubs weren't human, but they had been entrusted to human care. They would grow up knowing that when their own kind had been forced to abandon them, humans had risked everything to bring them home. That was a lesson worth teaching. That was a bond worth protecting. And if humanity could prove itself capable of that level of sacrifice and commitment, maybe the galaxy would finally understand what made humans special. Not their technology or their military might, but their absolute refusal to abandon those who needed protection. Little Bit settled into its favorite spot against Sarah's side, purring contentedly as the ship jumped to hyperspace. Through the medical bay's small viewport, the stars became streams of light, carrying them toward a new life and new possibilities. The cubs were no longer shivering. They were warm, safe, and heading home. The sanctuary station appeared on their view screen like a crystalline flower blooming in the darkness of space. Sarah had never seen Velkai architecture before, and the sight took her breath away. Where human structures were angular and functional, the Velkai had created something that seemed to grow organically from the vacuum itself. Graceful spires twisted around a central hub, connected by bridges that curved like frozen streams of light. Incoming transmission from Sanctuary Control, Tors reported. They're requesting permission to bring us into dock. Grant permission, Sarah replied, watching the cubs press against the viewport to see their destination. They had been increasingly excited as they approached Velkai space, their chirping and churring creating a constant background chorus of anticipation. Little Bit maintained its position on her lap, but even it was craning its small neck to see the station. Commander Chen, came a new voice over the communications system, speaking accented but clear standard. This is Sanctuary Director Mureth. We have been eagerly awaiting your arrival. The entire station has been prepared to welcome our lost children home. As the determination approached the docking bay, Sarah could see dozens of Velkai gathered at the observation windows. Word of the cubs' rescue had spread throughout the station, and it seemed like everyone wanted to catch the first glimpse of the survivors. The sight of so many of their own kind sent the cubs into a frenzy of excited activity. The docking procedure was smooth, and within minutes Sarah found herself standing at the airlock with 12 eager cubs clustering around her feet. They seemed torn between excitement at seeing other Velkai and reluctance to leave the safety of the ship that had become their home. The airlock cycled open to reveal Director Mureth, an elderly Velkai male whose silver-streaked fur and kind eyes spoke of a lifetime spent caring for the young. Behind him stood a team of what Sarah assumed were medical personnel and child care specialists, all watching the cubs with expressions of wonder and relief. "Welcome to Sanctuary," Mureth said formally, but Sarah could hear the emotion underlying his words. "These children have been mourned as lost. To see them healthy and strong is a gift beyond measure." The cubs seemed overwhelmed by the sudden appearance of so many adults of their own species. They pressed closer to Sarah, chirping nervously as they tried to process the new situation. Little Bit climbed up her uniform to perch on her shoulder, its small claws gripping tightly as it surveyed the crowd of strangers. "They're still adjusting," Sarah explained. "They've been through a lot and they've become attached to my crew. It might take some time for them to feel comfortable with new caregivers." "Of course," Mureth replied. "We have prepared quarters for you and your crew adjacent to the cubs' living areas. Our child psychologists recommend a gradual transition period to minimize trauma." As they made their way through the station's corridors, Sarah was struck by how different the environment felt from human ships and stations. The lighting was softer, more diffused, creating warm pools of amber illumination. The corridors themselves curved gently, following organic lines rather than the straight angles humans preferred. Everything was designed to feel welcoming and safe. The cubs' quarters were a marvel of thoughtful design. Instead of the sterile dormitory Sarah had expected, she found herself in a space that resembled a natural cave system. Soft, woven materials covered the walls and floors, creating comfortable nesting areas at different levels. Hidden lighting provided gentle illumination without harsh shadows, and the air recycling system produced a subtle breeze that carried hints of growing things. "This is beautiful," Sarah said, genuinely impressed. "We believe that environment shapes development," Mureth explained. "These cubs have experienced trauma and loss. Our goal is to provide them with a sense of security and belonging while they heal." The cubs immediately began exploring their new home, their natural curiosity overcoming their initial shyness. They investigated the various nesting areas, tested the different levels and platforms, and began to establish their hierarchy within the space. But Sarah noticed that they kept checking back with her, making sure she was still there. "Commander," one of the medical staff said, approaching with a scanner in hand, "we'd like to conduct complete health assessments on the cubs, with your permission, of course." "They're not mine," Sarah replied automatically. "I was just their temporary guardian during transport." Mureth's ears twitched in what Sarah was beginning to recognize as amusement. "Commander, according to Velkai law, these cubs bonded with you during a life-threatening situation. You saved their lives and cared for them during their time of greatest need. That makes you their pack leader until they choose to transfer that loyalty to another." "But I'm human. I don't know anything about raising Velkai cubs." "And yet you have done an excellent job so far," Mureth pointed out. "They are healthy, well-socialized, and clearly trust you completely. Many of our own people could not have achieved better results under such challenging circumstances." The medical examinations proceeded smoothly, with each cub allowing the staff to scan and examine them as long as Sarah remained in sight. The results confirmed what Dr. Martinez had already determined. The cubs were in excellent health despite their ordeal, showing no signs of lasting physical damage from their time in the cold. But the psychological evaluations were more complex. They show classic signs of trauma bonding, Dr. Kestel, the station's chief child psychologist, explained to Sarah in a private consultation. Their attachment to you is not just emotional, but survival-based. In their minds, you represent safety and protection in a universe that has already proven dangerous. How do we help them move past that? Carefully, Dr. Kestel replied. Forcing separation before they're ready could cause severe psychological damage. Instead, we gradually expand their circle of trust to include other caregivers while maintaining your presence as a stable anchor point. Over the following days, Sarah found herself learning more about Velkai child-rearing practices than she'd ever expected. The cubs were incredibly social creatures, requiring constant interaction and stimulation to develop properly. They learned through play and imitation, with older cubs naturally taking on teaching roles for younger ones. Little Bit had appointed itself as Sarah's personal guardian, following her everywhere and alerting the others whenever she left the quarters. The other cubs had developed their own relationships with various members of the sanctuary staff, but they all still looked to Sarah for final approval before accepting new people into their circle of trust. You've become their alpha, Tors observed one evening as they watched the cubs play in the main common area. They're treating you like the head of their pack. Sarah had to admit there was something deeply satisfying about the cubs' trust and affection. When Little Bit curled up in her lap for its afternoon nap, or when the older cubs brought her their problems to solve, she felt a sense of purpose that her military career had never provided. But she also knew that her mission couldn't last forever. The cubs needed to learn to rely on their own people for long-term stability and growth. The breakthrough came during a visit from a group of adult Velkai who had volunteered to serve as potential adoptive families for the orphaned cubs. Sarah watched nervously as the adults interacted with her charges, looking for signs of compatibility and bonding. Most of the cubs remained polite but distant with the potential families. They would accept attention and even play with the adults, but they always returned to Sarah's side when the interactions ended. It was clear that they weren't ready to form new primary attachments. Except for one. Velter, one of the middle cubs, seemed drawn to a young Velkai couple named Thessara and Mordan. They had lost their own cub to illness several months earlier and had requested to be considered as adoptive parents. Something about their gentle manner and patient approach resonated with Velter, who gradually began spending more time in their presence. This is how it begins, Dr. Kestel explained to Sarah as they watched Velter teaching the couple a game the cubs had invented aboard the Determination. One successful bonding will make it easier for the others to accept the possibility of new relationships. How long does the process usually take? For traumatized cubs, sometimes months, sometimes years, each one will be ready at their own pace. Sarah felt a mixture of pride and sadness as she watched Velter growing more comfortable with its potential new family. She wanted all the cubs to find loving homes, but she also couldn't deny the bond she'd developed with them. They had become her responsibility, her family in a way she'd never expected. That evening, as the cubs settled into their nesting areas for sleep, Little Bit approached her with something in its small hands. It was a simple bracelet woven from fibers taken from the wall coverings, primitive but clearly made with great care. For me, Sarah asked, and Little Bit chirped affirmatively, helping her put it on. The bracelet was too small for a human wrist, but Sarah wore it anyway, touched by the gesture. Around the quarters, she noticed that several of the other cubs were working on similar projects, weaving and crafting small gifts with intense concentration. They're making pack bonds, Mureth explained when he saw her examining the bracelet. In Velkai culture, cubs create and exchange tokens to formalize their acceptance of someone as family. They're declaring you as their chosen pack leader. Sarah looked around at the 12 cubs who had somehow become the most important thing in her universe. They weren't human, but they had chosen her as their protector and guide. In return, she had learned what it meant to put other lives before her own comfort, safety, or career ambitions. The galaxy was vast and often hostile, but it also contained moments of perfect connection between species that had every reason to remain strangers. These cubs had taught her that family wasn't about genetics or species compatibility. It was about choosing to stand together when the universe tried to tear you apart. And sometimes, that choice created bonds stronger than steel. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the observation lounge of Sanctuary Station, watching 11 young Velkai play in the zero-gravity recreation chamber below. They moved with the fluid grace of their species, their fur now thick and lustrous, their eyes bright with health and happiness. It was hard to believe these were the same frightened, half-frozen cubs she had pulled from the ruins of Kepler 442b. 11 cubs, not 12. Little Bit sat on her shoulder as it had every day since arriving at Sanctuary, now large enough that its weight required her to adjust her posture. The cub had grown considerably, but had never lost its attachment to Sarah. While its siblings had gradually formed bonds with various Velkai families, Little Bit had steadfastly refused all attempts at adoption. "Commander Chen," Dr. Kestel approached with a data pad in her hands and a concerned expression. "I have the final psychological evaluation results for Little Bit." Sarah gently stroked the cub's soft fur, feeling it purr against her neck. "Let me guess, still refusing to bond with Velkai families." "More than refusing. The evaluation shows that Little Bit has formed what we call an exclusive species preference bond. In simple terms, it no longer recognizes other Velkai as potential family members. You are its chosen parent, and it will not accept substitutes." This was what Sarah had been dreading. In the months since arriving at Sanctuary, she had watched 10 of the cubs successfully transition to new families. Velter had been the first, quickly followed by 3 others who had found homes with patient, loving Velkai couples. The process had been gradual but ultimately successful, with each cub eventually accepting that they could love new families without betraying their loyalty to Sarah. But Little Bit had been different from the beginning. While the others played with potential adoptive families, Little Bit remained glued to Sarah's side. While the others gradually spent more time in Velkai company, Little Bit insisted on sleeping in Sarah's quarters every night. It had learned to speak basic standard before mastering its own language, and it showed more interest in human customs than Velkai ones. "What does this mean for Little Bit's future?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Normally, we would continue therapy and gradually expose the cub to more Velkai social situations until the bond weakened enough to allow adoption. But in this case," Dr. Kestel paused, choosing her words carefully, "Little Bit is thriving under your care. Its psychological development is actually superior to that of most cubs its age. Forcing separation at this point would likely cause severe trauma." Sarah felt Little Bit's claws tighten slightly in her uniform, as if the cub could sense the direction of the conversation. It made a soft, churring sound and pressed closer to her neck. "Dr. Kestel, I'm a military officer. My career involves long deployments, dangerous assignments, and frequent relocations. That's not exactly an ideal environment for raising a child." "Commander, may I speak frankly?" Sarah nodded. "You have been on extended leave for 6 months, caring for these cubs with a level of dedication that exceeds what most biological parents provide. You have learned our language, studied our child-rearing practices, and created an environment where traumatized children could heal and grow. Your military career seems to have taken a secondary role to your responsibilities as a caregiver." It was true, Sarah realized. She had barely thought about her actual assignment in weeks. The colonial administration had granted her indefinite leave to complete her guardianship duties, but she had stopped checking for new orders or mission updates. Her entire focus had shifted to the daily needs and development of the cubs under her care. "Director Mureth has asked me to present you with a formal proposal," Dr. Kestel continued. "The Velkai Council has authorized the creation of a new position, Interspecies Child Advocacy Specialist. The role would involve overseeing the care of orphaned cubs who have formed bonds with non-Velkai guardians, as well as developing protocols for similar situations in the future." Sarah looked down at Little Bit, who was watching her with those large, intelligent eyes. The cub had learned to read human expressions with uncanny accuracy, and it seemed to understand that this conversation would determine its future. "You're offering me a permanent position here at Sanctuary. We're offering you the opportunity to formalize what you're already doing. Little Bit needs you, Commander, and based on our experience over the past 6 months, we believe that other cubs in similar situations would benefit from your expertise." Before Sarah could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the station. The lights dimmed to emergency illumination, and automated announcements echoed through the corridors in both Standard and Velkai. All personnel to emergency stations. Incoming distress signal from transport vessel Bright Wing. Multiple casualties reported. Medical teams to primary docking bay. Sarah's military training kicked in immediately. "What's the situation?" she asked, moving toward the nearest communications panel with Little Bit still clinging to her shoulder. Tor's voice crackled through the intercom from their docked ship. "Commander, we're receiving a priority distress call from a Velkai transport that suffered catastrophic system failures in hyperspace. They're carrying refugees from the Kepler mining disaster on Kepler 438C. Multiple hull breaches, life support failing, and they've got wounded aboard." "How many?" Sarah asked, already heading toward the docking bay. 200 adults and 43 cubs, ma'am. They're requesting immediate medical assistance and emergency docking." Sarah's mind raced through the implications. 43 more orphaned cubs, probably traumatized by another colonial disaster. The sanctuary staff was excellent, but they had limited experience dealing with mass casualty situations involving children. "Dr. Kestile," Sarah said, turning to the psychologist, "how quickly can you prepare trauma counseling resources for 43 cubs?" We don't have the facilities for that many emergency cases," Dr. Kestel admitted. "Our protocols are designed for individual placements, not mass evacuation scenarios." "Then we'll have to improvise." Sarah was already moving, her command training taking over. "I need you to identify which cubs are most likely to have attachment disorders based on the initial reports. Little Bit, I need you to help me communicate with them when they arrive." Little Bit chirped affirmatively, understanding its role. Over the months at Sanctuary, it had become Sarah's unofficial translator and cultural guide, helping bridge the communication gap between human and Velkai perspectives. The next several hours were a controlled chaos of emergency medical procedures and crisis management. The Bright Wing limped into dock with massive hull damage and a cargo hold full of refugees who had lost everything in the latest colonial disaster. The adult Velkai were dealing with their own trauma and grief, leaving the cubs frightened and confused in an alien environment. Sarah found herself naturally taking charge of the cub evacuation, organizing the sanctuary staff into efficient teams, while Little Bit helped translate and comfort the newer arrivals. Her military experience in disaster response proved invaluable as she established triage protocols and created temporary family groups to prevent the cubs from feeling completely isolated. "Commander," Dr. Kestel said during a brief break in the chaos, "you've organized this response better than anyone on our staff could have managed. These cubs are responding to your leadership just like the original 12 did." Sarah looked around at the temporary shelters they had set up in the station's main recreation areas. 43 frightened cubs were gradually settling into the routine she had established, with older ones helping to care for younger ones under the guidance of sanctuary staff. It was organized chaos, but it was working. "They need stability and clear leadership during crisis situations," Sarah explained. "Human military doctrine emphasizes creating order from chaos. It translates well to child care during emergencies." "Commander Chen," Director Mureth approached with an urgent expression, "I've just received word from the Colonial Administration. There have been 3 more evacuation scenarios in this sector in the past month. Each one has resulted in orphaned cubs who need specialized care." Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders again. The galaxy was apparently full of disasters waiting to happen, and someone needed to be prepared to help the youngest victims when everything went wrong. "How many more cubs are we talking about?" "Current estimates suggest over 200 orphaned or displaced cubs in the next 6 months, Mureth replied. "The Velkai Council has formally requested that you accept the position of interspecies child advocacy specialist. We need someone who can coordinate multi-species emergency response for child welfare." Sarah looked down at Little Bit, who was watching the conversation with intense interest. The cub had become more than her adopted child. It had become her partner in a mission she was only beginning to understand. "What about my military career?" Sarah asked, though the question felt perfunctory. She already knew what her answer would be. "The Colonial Administration has agreed to transfer you to civilian contractor status with full benefits and rank retention," Dr. Kestel explained. "You would be working for the Velkai Council, but maintaining your human military credentials for interspecies coordination purposes." Sarah thought about her original mission to Kepler 442b, which had been routine salvage and documentation. She thought about the frozen cubs she had found in that ruined building, and the way Little Bit had trusted her with its life. She thought about 43 more cubs who would need someone to stand between them and a hostile universe. "I accept the position," she said formally, "but I have conditions." "Name them," Mureth replied immediately. "My crew comes with me. Torres and Martinez have become part of this operation, and I won't take the job without them. Second, I want full authority to establish emergency protocols for child welfare in disaster zones. Third, Little Bit is my adopted child, and that relationship is non-negotiable." Little Bit chirped happily and nuzzled against her neck, understanding enough of the conversation to know that it wouldn't be separated from its chosen parent. "Agreed on all points," Mureth said with obvious relief. "Commander, you have no idea how much this means to our people. These cubs will grow up knowing that when their own kind couldn't save them, humans stepped in to provide protection and care." Sarah looked around at the cubs settling into their temporary homes, at Little Bit purring contentedly on her shoulder, at the sanctuary staff working tirelessly to provide comfort and safety to young lives that had been torn from everything familiar. "Director," she said quietly, "I think I'm beginning to understand what humans are really meant to do in this galaxy. We're not just explorers or soldiers or diplomats. We're the ones who refuse to let anyone fall through the cracks, even if they're not our own species." "Especially if they're not your own species," Dr. Kestel added with a smile. "That's what makes humanity special, Commander, your willingness to extend family bonds beyond the boundaries of genetics and biology." As the emergency response settled into a more manageable routine, Sarah stood in the observation lounge again, watching cubs from two different disasters playing together under the gentle guidance of mixed human and Velkai staff. Little Bit had grown sleepy and was dozing against her shoulder, occasionally purring in its sleep. Somewhere in the galaxy, there were probably more disasters waiting to happen. More cubs who would need someone to stand between them and the cold, hostile universe. More opportunities for humanity to prove that the bonds between species could be stronger than fear, stronger than prejudice, stronger than the vast distances that separated their worlds. Sarah Chen had come to Kepler 442b to document a failure. Instead, she had discovered a calling that would define the rest of her life. She had learned that sometimes the most important military victories had nothing to do with weapons or tactics. Sometimes, victory meant refusing to let the vulnerable shiver in the cold. Sometimes, it meant wrapping them in your armor and carrying them home.